Are we to go ahead on airstrikes on both sides of the Iraq-Syria border?
Yes. Well, I think the challenge that is primary is that there are many different regional campaigns that ISIS is conducting and that it is able to synchronize them. For example, in northern Iraq, ISIS is operating in a way that it can balance back and forth with how they are operating in northern Syria. If something starts to work against them in northern Iraq, they can surge in eastern Iraq or in northeastern Syria. And we have seen them do this over the course of the last few weeks. So one of the challenges is affecting ISIS throughout its depth at such a time that it actually disrupts their campaign planning and their flexibility. One of the opportunities that we also have, as you mentioned, is to affect ISIS on both sides of the Iraq-Syria border. It could potentially be an assumption of ISIS going in that the United States and international community is more likely to become engaged in Iraq than in Syria. And if that planning assumption ISIS were to fail, if they were to face airstrikes, for example, also in Syria, then that also presents a very significant opportunity.
Now, as it moves back and forth between this basically non-existent border between Iraq and Syria, were we to strike on one side or another, would targets become open? Would supply lines become open for us to hit?
I believe so, yes. Some of the most critical supply lines for ISIS cross the Jazeera Desert, but because they have control of the roads, they are most likely adhering to them. So it is likely that ISIS, with this bureaucracy, has repeatable processes, and the more repetition they have within their campaign, the easier it is to target it effectively. But I think one of the points that we should consider is that there is also military terrain that is significant to ISIS. In Iraq and in Syria, ISIS is taking over bases, and those also present a potential target set.
We have less than a minute left. We hear a lot about the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who has almost formed a cult of personality around himself. How hard would he be to track down, and how essential is he to ISIS? In other words, were we to hit him, would that kill ISIS, or would somebody else just replace him?
Well, I think that he is very significant to this group. He is actually the personified caliph leading this caliphate. However, as we look at this bureaucracy and we see that this is a very functional institution, the institutional leadership, I would say the regional commanders within the ISIS military especially, are the most critical targets to disrupt them.
Jessica, thank you. Thanks very much. We want to have you back to discuss this more in depth.